Come together right now. Who over me? Parshat Bo. Come, not go. Bo, not go. It could have been go to Paro, any other sort of language that Hashem could have used to send him there, but instead Hashem says, Moshe, come with me. I'm going to be there with you. Bo b'yachad. There's an idea in this week's Parsha that whether we're looking at this the sense of the birth of a nation, or whether we're looking at this in a more metaphorical sense, as many of them unfortunately bring down, that Paro is sort of the representative of the darkness of a personal struggle. There's a lot we can learn about how to go through these kinds of challenges, accept God into our lives, and be able to move forward with real success. So take a step back here for a second and think about who is Paro. Paro at this point, he's just seen the first half of the economic destruction of his country through the Barad, and now, as he's being warned about the next plague, he continues to resist. He, in last week's Parsha, said, hey, look, I'm sorry, you were right, I got to let you go, don't worry. Immediately hardens his heart again. Even so much so at this point, his advisors say, hey, look, we are in ruin. Let them go. He still finds random reasons. No, you can't take your kids. No, you can't take your animals. Every single time he finds some reason to say no, and he never really makes the time to reflect and acknowledge that it's time to let the people go. So the Parsha starts off with the three plagues, classic Vort and the family, Gematria of Bo, Aleph, Bet, 1 plus 2, 3. That's the three plagues that we have, the final three plagues. And we have this pairing, the kind of maybe a sensible pairing of Barad and Arba, where we have first economic decline through hail, and then we have this second economic decline through the locust. And then we have the last two plagues. And it almost feels like, in a way, that the two plagues are totally disconnected. Why do we end off with the second last plague as darkness? That doesn't sound quite so scary to me. So there's something to unpack in this one a little bit more. Choshech is darkness. So some people say that this is actually a sandstorm, maybe it was an eclipse. There's a lot of different ways to understand what kind of darkness this was. But Bnei Israel are sitting in their homes and they have some light. We start to see that after seeing all of these first 8 plagues, they start to have a sense that actually they might be able to get out of this, and they're going to get they're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. In contrast, the Egyptians are struggling very much. They're in a position where they can't move. They're physically frozen. So think fight, flight. They're in freeze. They're at a point of inaction right now. But taking a step behind this, there's a perspective that we have around what this plague is and how it is actually Hashem fighting for the Israelites in a stronger way. So we talked a few weeks ago about Ramses, the god of the sun. Ra is the Egyptian god of the sun. So when Hashem is doing this fight with Paro, it makes sense that this high god that Paro is representing ends up being one of the final battles that Hashem actually fights. He says, hey, you think that you are representative of the god of light? I'm going to show you that he is nothing to me. But it goes one step further than this. In Egyptian mythology, there's an idea that Ra eats his children every day. So the stars are Ra's children, and then every single morning, Ra eats his children. In a way, Hashem is actually coming to say, look, I came to you and I told you I want you to look after my children, let them go. You saying no every single time. I'm going to show you that not just am I the bigger God, a true omnipotent God in this sense, but I'm also fighting against you in the way that you would. There's no eating of the children anymore. I'm going to show you that this is not the way that we continue. And this actually makes it even more sensible why it connects right now into the actual pairing with Bechorot, because Makat Bechorot now is Hashem fulfilling that final promise and saying, look, you're not going to respect children, you're not going to let my children go. I'm going to show you, and I'm going to kill your firstborns. And it brings together these two plagues in a more sensible way as a final pairing, and really brings together that promise that Hashem made to Moshe at the beginning, that this is what it's going to take to let them go. So from this point on, we start to shift into salvation. So this is where, whether we look at this on the personal level or the national level, the first sort of commandment that God gives the people. He says through Moshe, he says, go ask for gold from your neighbors, from your friends even. And there's a number of ways that we can think about this. On the one hand, there's the base level. The Bnei Israel are getting paid for their work, whether it's for the slavery that they had for so many years, for hundreds of years, or if it's for the land that they're not going to take with them when they leave Egypt, and they're sort of getting some kind of compensation for that. There's a number of ways to look at that, but at the same time, there's also potentially a way to think about this as a way of acknowledging freedom. Later in Chumash, we learn about when we let a slave go free, we have to give them possessions. We give them compensation in a way. It's not really compensation, but what we do is we do this to be able to free the slave from the mindset of slavery, so they don't have hatred for their master anymore. So much so that later in the Parsha we learn, or later in the Chumash we learn, that we're not supposed to hate the Egyptian. So this act of asking for compensation in a way, or for some kind of monetary reward from the Egyptians, is that way of us saying, hey, we don't have to hate you anymore because we've been paid. If you think about this more in maybe a personal level, the idea that we are supposed to ask, lish'ol, is such a foreign idea for somebody. To be able to ask and to make that kind of a bakasha is what Hashem is guiding us to do as the first step to stepping out of slavery and into a life of freedom. The next commandment that we got is Rosh Chodesh, and Rosh Chodesh tied to Rosh Hashanah, this new first year. And when we talked about Paro before as this antithesis to freedom that we have in our lives, whether in practical sense, in a personal sense, Paro never reflects. And what God is giving us here is a cycle for reflection. The moon, with its waxing and waning, its cycles, its renewals, its rebirths, gives us a shorter time frame for us to understand what's going on in our world, think about things. And really, if you take a step back and think about this as a guidance for somebody who's moving from maybe working for somebody else to working for themselves, you need these kinds of systems to set yourself up for success, to move forward with a cycle of review. Don't make a whole bunch of plans. Find shorter cycles of review to be able to make success out of your life. And so much so that when God tells us how to set up our year for success, he doesn't tell you start your year off with resolutions and plans and all kinds of ideas like that. He says start your year off with remembering where you came from, understanding what you've overcome, understand who has your back, that God is in this with you, and that there's a path forward to a new kind of rebirth and a different kind of freedom. It gives us constant reminders to pass this on to our children. There's 3 or 4 different reminders to make this passing on to the children. And really, if you want to take on this new identity, it's important for us to understand the impact of this. So what are we asked to remember? We're asked to remember unleavened bread. We don't eat bread for a week, only matzah. We're asked to remember bitter herbs. And we're asked to remember the Paschal lamb. And to me, this has always been a really kind of an interesting thing. You think about the Jews at the time from a nation perspective. We have this old identity of them as slaves. For hundreds of years, they've been sitting in this land, and they have never been able to eat sheep. This is the god of the Egyptians. Sheep, goat, whichever one it is. No question in my mind that they have struggled with the idea that they could slaughter this thing. So what God is asking them to do is to do a huge leap of faith, take a huge leap of faith in terms of action. But what is behind this he's asking them to do? This shift of identity goes one step further. So I grew up always hearing that this was the god of the Egyptians. But who is this god really for the Egyptians? Some people call this god Chnum, some people call it Amun. This god is personified, or the imagery of this god is personified as a sheep's head humanoid that is a potter making people out of clay. Considered to be one of the highest gods of ancient Egypt, is the creator god, bringing people into existence. So what Hashem is really asking the nation to do at this time, after hundreds of years of never eating sheep, this is infused in their DNA that we don't eat this animal for now. Generational trauma of slavery and I would never eat that animal. God is asking them to bo biyachad with him. Come together with me in this fight. You're going to step in with me, bo biyachad, and we're going to fight for our freedom together. So while I fight Ra, you will fight Amun Chnum, their God who makes people, and this will lead to the freedom that we have. So this connects with the idea that we have of Pidyon Bechor, that children are important. They become part of the continuity of undoing that old identity and infusing a new one. Such a central part of Judaism, Masorah, the idea of Pesach, where we're passing on the story, really infusing every generation with this new identity of freedom. When a parent has their first, makes them become a parent, they understand that this becomes their part of the continuity. They redeem that son literally with money. They redeem that animal literally with an edible one. There's a form of redemption here that starts even in a small way. And then closing the parsha, we have tefillin, a way of connecting what's on our head with on our arm next to our heart, a way of connecting our head with our heart in action, and doing those same kinds of bold things as we step forward for this new identity and for freedom, both as a nation, as a Bnei Yisrael, and also for freedom personally from slavery and other kinds of misidentity. With that in mind, there's a lot that we can learn. Bo b'yachad, go together. Thank you for listening. Again, if there are any ideas that this sparks, would love to hear from you. And Shabbat Shalom.